This was the worst aviation disaster in the United States since the tragic American Airlines crash in 2001. American Airlines Flight 5342, a CRJ 771 operated by PSA, lifted off from Wichita, Kansas, bound for Reagan National Airport. On board were 60 passengers, 2 pilots, and 2 flight attendants, all expecting a routine journey. Meanwhile, miles away, an Army helicopter was about to take flight. The UH-60 Black Hawk, call sign Pat 25, took off from Davidson Army Airfield, just 15 miles outside Washington, D.C. Inside the cockpit were 2 pilots and a crew chief. One of the pilots was a highly experienced trainer with over 3,000 flight hours under his belt, while the other, with 500 hours, was undergoing a check flight. At this moment, the skies were perfect, crystal clear with unlimited visibility. Pat 25 was conducting an evaluation flight, departing from Davidson Airfield and heading toward the northern starting point of helicopter Route 1. Their path would take them over the Potomac River via the American Legion Bridge, deep within the 495 beltway surrounding Washington, D.C. Navigating this airspace required precision. Strict altitude limits had to be followed, ranging from 300 feet down to just 200 feet at the southernmost stretch, where the Anacostia River meets the Potomac. As Pat 25 continued its flight, it transitioned to the H4 route, where the altitude ceiling dropped even lower, maxing out at 200 feet. Though flying under Visual Flight Rules, VFR, they stayed in contact with Reagan Tower, keeping a close line of communication as they moved through this carefully controlled airspace. Navigating these air corridors isn't for the faint of heart. These routes are a maze of dense air traffic, strict altitude limits, and high security zones, making them some of the most challenging paths for military pilots. Only the most skilled and experienced crews are trusted to fly through these tightly controlled areas. Meanwhile, American Airlines Flight 5342 had nearly completed its trip from Wichita and was preparing for landing at Reagan National Airport. Like Pat 25, it was under Reagan Tower's control, but on a completely different frequency, meaning the 2 aircraft had no direct communication with each other. As the CRJ 771 approached the airport, one of the pilots radioed in, reporting that he had visual contact with runway 1. The controller then made a crucial request. Would they be able to switch to runway 33 instead? Without hesitation, the pilot confirmed, yes, we will switch to 33. That was all the tower needed. Clearance to land was granted. But here's the catch. Runway 33 isn't just any landing strip. It's one of the most challenging at Reagan. Pilots must execute their descent with near-perfect precision, adjusting their approach at the last moment, almost like landing on an aircraft carrier. One wrong move, and things could get dangerous fast. Just as Flight 5342 was closing in on its landing, alarms blared in the cockpit. The aircraft's collision avoidance system, KAS, flashed a warning on the display. Something was dangerously close. The pilot immediately radioed in, asking if Pat 25 had visual contact with the CRJ. Air traffic control instructed the Black Hawk crew to turn east and fly behind the CRJ, ensuring safe separation. Pat 25 responded, confirming they had the aircraft in sight and requested additional separation. But this response was vague. After all, the controller had already given a direct order to stay behind the CRJ. Was there a misunderstanding? A split-second miscalculation? Then came the moment of impact, partially captured on video from multiple angles. One recording from the Kennedy Center, overlooking the Potomac River, showed the Lincoln Memorial and the 14th Street Bridge below. In the footage, another aircraft can be seen taking off just before the disaster unfolds. Other witnesses, including a driver near Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, also captured the shocking event on video, providing a chilling glimpse of the chaos in the sky. According to an in-depth analysis shared on the Ward Carroll channel, based on insights from a Coast Guard helicopter pilot with extensive experience on this very route, the disaster may have stemmed from a critical misunderstanding. This pilot, who had flown the approach countless times, highlighted an unusual factor that could have played a key role. Landings on runway 33 are rare. Typically, civilian aircraft are not cleared to switch to this runway until they are just a few miles from the airport. Because of this, the UH-60 Black Hawk crew may not have expected the CRJ to be approaching from the northwest. Instead, they may have been focused on a more common approach, runway 1. If the helicopter crew mistakenly assumed the visible landing lights to the south belonged to the aircraft they needed to avoid, they would have continued their flight path southward, unaware that Flight 5342 was closing in fast from their 10 o'clock position. This misinterpretation would have left them completely vulnerable to the oncoming jet. Meanwhile, the CRJ crew was intensely focused on their approach to Reagan National, navigating through the city's vast sea of lights. Spotting a small moving object like the Black Hawk in this visual complexity would have been extremely difficult. By the time they realized the danger, it was likely too late to react effectively. In the end, a rare runway change, a misidentified miles away, position, an Army visually overwhelming environment, the UH-60 Black Hawk call storm. Neither crew seemed fully aware of the imminent collision, and with only seconds to spare, inside the cockpit were two pilots. It's entirely possible that both flight crews were completely unaware of the looming danger until it was far too late. While the critical moments leading up to the collision suggest that neither the UH-60 Black Hawk nor the CRJ-200, with unlimited visibility, dangerously close they were to each other, conducting an evaluation aviation environment from Davidson Airfield awareness heading toward the northern starting even the most experienced crews can sometimes misinterpret them over the details or fail to recognize an impending threat. One particularly alarming theory, the military Black Hawk, designated as PAT-25, may have inadvertently strayed above its designated altitude limit while transiting the H-4 corridor, right at the worst possible time. This corridor is a tightly controlled military training route, but it intersects with civilian flight paths, requiring precise altitude management. If PAT-25 climbed above its assigned limit, even slightly, it could have placed itself directly in the path of the approaching commercial jet. Air traffic control radar data supports this troubling possibility. At the exact moment Flight 5342 was descending on its final approach to land, the Black Hawk was recorded flying higher than its minimum altitude restriction. If true, this would mean the helicopter had unknowingly entered the CRJ's flight path mere seconds before impact. Such a miscalculation, even if momentary, could have been the fatal error that sealed their fate, adding to the complexity, reduced visibility, cockpit workload, or an assumption that all aircraft were properly separated might have contributed to both crews failing to detect the danger in time. Whether it was a failure in communication, navigation, or simple human error, this incident underscores the importance of strict adherence to altitude restrictions and constant vigilance in shared airspace. Unfortunately, by the time either crew may have realized the imminent threat, there was no chance to correct course. The U.S. Secretary of Defense confirmed that the Black Hawk crew had access to night vision goggles, NVGs, but the critical question remains, were they actually using them during this flight? If so, could the goggles have played a role in the tragedy? Tupper Wolf, a former U.S. Coast Guard member, weighed in on this crucial detail, providing valuable insight into the limitations of NVG technology. I'm from the Coast Guard, but I assume the military crew had NVGs. However, NVGs are not a magic solution. They don't display colors, and they significantly limit peripheral vision. In brightly lit urban areas, they can even be washed out. In fact, in an environment like Washington, D.C., using NVGs could make it difficult for pilots to identify hazards as they may blur their vision. NVGs are really useful only in low-light environments, such as over forests or power lines. This raises an alarming possibility. If the Black Hawk pilots were relying on NVGs, they might have actually been at a disadvantage rather than gaining an advantage. Washington, D.C.'s bright cityscape could have created glare or washed out images, making it even harder to detect an approaching aircraft. Unlike in rural or tactical settings where NVGs excel, the urban environment could have hindered depth perception and situational awareness. Another major concern, the limited field of view NVGs provide. If the Black Hawk pilots were focused southward, their tunnel vision could have completely masked the CRJ approaching from their 10 o'clock position. This means they may have had no visual warning of the impending collision until it was far too late. Ultimately, if NVGs were in use, they may have contributed to a devastating oversight, one that cost both crews their chance to react in time. Could the Traffic Collision Avoidance System, TCAS, have fallen short when it was needed most? Tupper Wolf sheds light on the limitations of TCAS, especially in congested airspaces like Reagan National Airport, DCA. While TCAS can be a lifesaver in some scenarios, its effectiveness can plummet in chaotic, high-traffic environments. When overloaded, the system may fail to deliver critical, timely warnings, leaving pilots in a precarious position. Wolf elaborated on this challenge, comparing it to a common household annoyance. Imagine having a doorbell camera going off constantly while you're hosting a party. Every alarm would make it hard to focus on what's important. In such a bustling airspace, constant alerts from TCAS could become overwhelming, causing crucial warnings to blend blend into the background noise. This raises the troubling possibility that vital alerts were either delayed or overlooked entirely as the two aircraft converged toward disaster. Did the military helicopter crew make a devastating mistake, or were the CRJ pilots at fault for failing to follow proper landing protocols? The truth is still unfolding, but one thing is certain. Someone missed a critical warning sign. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and the U.S. Army Investigation Division are now meticulously analyzing every detail of this tragic event. Over the coming weeks, they will determine exactly what went wrong, examining air traffic control communications, flight data, and crew decisions. Investigators will seek answers to one crucial question. Could this disaster have been prevented? One fact remains undeniable. Collision avoidance is the responsibility of every flight crew. Aviation safety depends on strict adherence to established protocols, and in high-risk airspace, every second counts. Proper coordination between pilots, air traffic controllers, and military operations is essential to preventing these incidents. During landing, the co-pilot plays a crucial role, scanning the skies, monitoring blind spots, and ensuring no unexpected obstacles enter the flight path. Any lapse in situational awareness can have catastrophic consequences. Even a brief misjudgment in communication or positioning can turn routine operations into disaster. This collision serves as a tragic reminder of the razor-thin margin for error in aviation. As the investigation unfolds, the aviation community will scrutinize what went wrong, because in the skies, safety is never just one person's job. Final thoughts. Did the Black Hawk PAT-25 climb higher than allowed, putting it directly in the CRJ's path? If so, this could have been a critical miscalculation that increased the risk of a mid-air disaster. But beyond that, a lack of situational awareness from both crews may have played an even bigger role in this tragedy. Yet, there's another glaring issue. Was there enough preparation for emergencies in such a chaotic airspace? Reagan National Airport operates in an environment where multiple aircraft are constantly maneuvering while juggling rapid-fire communication with air traffic control. In such a high-stakes setting, even the smallest oversight can have devastating consequences. But what else should we be questioning? Was there a flaw in training or crew procedures? Did gaps in flight control protocols contribute to this collision? Are there hidden factors we haven't fully uncovered? The investigation may provide answers, but will it come too late to prevent the next disaster? This tragic collision now stands as the deadliest aviation accident in the U.S. since 2001, when an American Airlines flight plummeted into a residential neighborhood in Belle Harbor, New York, claiming the lives of all 260 people on board and 5 more on the ground. As investigations continue, we can only hope that new details will emerge in the coming days, shedding light on exactly what led to this catastrophic event. Until then, our deepest condolences go out to the families and loved ones affected by this devastating tragedy.